Well, welcome everyone to the May Local Public Safety Coordinating Council. My name is Eric Geyer. I chair this meeting. We do have a full agenda today. I do want to welcome Mayor Sparacino, who is in his first meeting in this capacity as mayor. Certainly no stranger, but it's good to see you again, sir. Thank you. Today's agenda, we have a presentation from the City of Medford on the Prohibited Camping Ordinance. We also have a presentation from the Recovery Opportunity Court Program. That court currently is in session. They hope to be here by 12:15, 12:30 to make their, when it's their turn on the agenda, but they might be running up against, I heard they had a pretty full docket today. So we will work within that. First order of business though is the minute adoption. Oh, Jasmine, do we have quorum? I'm sorry. Okay, great. So is there any discussion on the April minutes? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
This is Hilda. I move to approve.
Hilda with the motion. And did we have a second? I'm sorry.
Sure, I'll second.
Thanks, Sheriff. All right. Jasmine, would you mind doing a roll call vote, please, in terms of the approval?
Okay. Lieutenant Aldridge?
Yes.
Dave Carter?
Yes.
Chief Clausen?
Yes.
Commissioner Daughter?
Yes.
Doug Engel?
Yes.
Chair Geyer?
Yes.
Jennifer Lind? Oh, sorry, Judge Mejia?
Yes.
Okay. Hilda?
Yes.
Tina Qualls?
Yes.
Sheriff Sickler?
Yes.
And Mayor Sparacino?
I'm going to abstain since I wasn't at the last meeting.
Okay. That's still a majority, so we are good.
So we're very lucky today to have two guests to speak about the ordinance that the City of Medford just passed and in terms of what that entails. And to that effect, I'd like to turn the floor over to Chief Clausen from the City of Medford, as well as Deputy City Attorney Eric Mitten. So gentlemen, thank you for being here today, and the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Eric Mitten. I'm the Deputy City Attorney for the City of Medford, and I'm here to talk about the City of Medford's Prohibited Camping Ordinance, how it was created and what it entails. First, it would not be a presentation from a lawyer without some disclaimers. So first, nothing here I'm giving is legal advice. I'm talking about the history of what the city looked at when developing its own ordinance. Certainly, if there's any other jurisdictions out there considering things, please talk to your city attorney or county council, get your own independent legal advice. This is also a rapidly developing area of law. I can't give any promise of how this ordinance will be viewed by courts. As folks probably have heard, we just were sued by a local attorney representing several plaintiffs over this ordinance. I'm not going to talk about that lawsuit at all today. I'm simply going to talk about the ordinance itself, not really in a position to answer questions about the lawsuit itself or, you know, our legal position on that. But I just want to talk about the ordinance, how it was created, what it entails, etc. So one of the two cases that really triggered a change in the city's ordinance, obviously, is Martin v. City of Boise from a couple of years ago. And that established that it's considered an Eighth Amendment issue to criminalize sleeping outdoors if there's no alternative possibility. If a homeless individual doesn't have any alternative, a city would violate the Eighth Amendment by criminalizing sleeping anywhere outdoors on public property. And there is an important footnote 8 in the Martin case, and there's two separate provisions of this that different cities have looked at and looking at how to respond to it. The first provision states that the holding doesn't cover individuals who have access to shelter but choose not to use it. And the second point in footnote 8 is that the holding doesn't prohibit basically time, place, manner regulations. Even where shelter is unavailable, a city can still prohibit sleeping outside at particular times, particular locations, without violating the Eighth Amendment, and can place certain limitations on the manner of sleeping outside, such as prohibiting the erection of certain structures without violating the Eighth Amendment. The Blake v. Grants Pass case, which came out last year in the middle of the year, really clarified that. And The Blake case is, technically speaking, it's not binding because it's a district court opinion as opposed to a Ninth Circuit opinion, but it is from the local federal court, the Medford division of the District of Oregon. So it is a good indication of where the Medford division would go with future cases. So there's several different ways in which the Blake case clarified the previous Martin v. City of Boise case. It established that the right to sleep on public property for an individual who does not have alternative to sleep elsewhere includes a right to put down bedding to keep warm or dry. There's that language, warm or dry, but my understanding of that opinion is that it's talking about bedding because the court does discuss tents separately during its opinion. It states that when talking about available shelter for the Boise analysis, if the city wants to argue that there is available shelter elsewhere, it needs to be low barrier. And it particularly talked about shelters that have mandatory religious components. And at least for purposes of a Boise analysis as to whether there's available shelter, a shelter that has a mandatory religious component to it may not count as available shelter under the Blake v. Grants Pass opinion. It also clarified that non-criminal violations are subject to the same Eighth Amendment analysis as criminal penalties are. The Boise case had really talked about criminal penalties, and this case clarified that a citywide prohibition of sleeping outside, even if it's classified as a non-criminal violation, may still be an Eighth Amendment issue. And then it also delved into a discussion of not just the Prohibited Camping Ordinance in Grants Pass, but also their Civil Exclusion Ordinance, and cited certain particular issues about that particular Civil Exclusion Ordinance that the court found problematic, that there were unclear standards for exclusion from parks, that it could potentially criminalize sleeping in a park because one could get a civil exclusion for sleeping in a park, and then if one slept in a park again, be criminally penalized for violating the exclusion. And it also lacked a pre-deprivation hearing process for an individual who wanted to contest their exclusion notice. So once again, there's some important caveats in the opinion though. It makes clear it's not stating that cities have to provide shelter, that they need to build shelter, or that cities are unable to regulate sitting, lying, or sleeping at any place or any time. Once again, it cited the possibility of time and place restrictions and manner restrictions in terms of what bedding is involved, specifically discussed that the language about bedding, laying down bedding while people sleep, doesn't mean that people can use unlimited amounts of bedding, or that tents in city parks are covered by that ruling, and made clear that this is really talking about prohibited camping and civil exclusion as opposed to other laws such as littering, public urination, obstruction of roadways, drug offenses, harassment, violence, and that the holding had no effect on those sorts of ordinances. So there's multiple different ways that cities have responded to this, and one option that City Council discussed in a study session before going the route that it did in Medford was what the City of Boise actually did before their lawsuit. And I want to talk about that as something that we looked at but we didn't pursue, just to illustrate that there's multiple different ways of responding to these cases. So after the Boise decision, the City of Boise actually entered into a settlement with the National Homelessness Law Center that had brought that lawsuit. And there's a few different components of that. One, that they would spend a certain amount of city funds to improve services to homeless individuals, and that part of those funds would be dedicated to building shelter space. Now, their ordinance is interesting because it still does, on its face, prohibit sleeping or camping outside citywide, but it's got now a non-enforcement provision where if there's not available shelter space at a particular time when an officer contacts a particular homeless individual, the ordinance can't be enforced at that time. So if shelters are not full, individuals can be contacted anywhere in the city for sleeping outside, but when shelters become full, the city has to completely stop enforcing this ordinance. And if shelter space is available, but an individual doesn't want to go, if there's a certain limited number of reasons why an individual would not have to go to an available shelter space. If it's not available to them due to sex, sexual orientation, parental status, if they have children with them, physical or mental matters, if they're a member of a different religion, etc. But it is a very specific, limited list of reasons why someone is not required to use an available shelter space if one is available. Now, certainly I'm not criticizing the city of Boise. There's multiple different ways of addressing this, but there are certain concerns with this particular approach that we wanted to highlight, and I think are part of the reason why the city of Medford didn't pursue this particular approach. It really doesn't allow much regulation of public property on days when shelters are full, because it's really an all or nothing approach. And it's for individuals experiencing homelessness, it doesn't add much predictability on, are they going to be contacted by law enforcement for sleeping in this particular manner, in this particular location? It's going to depend on whether or not there's shelter beds available, and there's no clear discussion about, if I sleep here, I know it's lawful and I know I'm not going to be contacted with law enforcement for doing so. And then the last thing I found particularly challenging about the Boise approach is it forces individual officers and individual deputies to have conversations with homeless people about their religion, about their sexual orientation, and trying to figure out whether or not they're an appropriate fit for a particular shelter bed. And that's an uncomfortable conversation to force under color of law in the middle of the night. And it is somewhat of a problematic approach in that respect. And like I said, I'm not trying to criticize Boise, and certainly there's multiple different approaches to addressing this. But the city of Medford really took a different approach. If you remember in footnote 8 of Boise, there were two separate provisions. The first saying that, talking about if there's available shelter space and choose not to use it, that's really the Boise approach. The second provision in footnote 8 was basically allowing for time, place, manner regulation, whether or not there are available shelter beds. And that's really more of the direction the city of Medford went with its ordinance. So in trying to figure out what we wanted to focus on, when you're doing time, place, manner regulations, you need to prioritize particular public concerns. And one of them in the city of Medford, obviously, is fire safety. Let me go back. It's not cooperating with me. There we go. So fires along the Greenway are a significant public safety hazard, and they are a public safety hazard for individuals experiencing homelessness as well. I think, unfortunately, if people remember the Penninger fire, there was a gentleman sleeping along the Greenway who was overcome by that fire and burned to death during that fire. And that is a very real risk if people are sleeping in blackberries when there's a major fire event, if it sweeps through, particularly if it were to happen late at night, as the Almeida fire happened in the middle of the day where people could see it coming from a long distance away. But that is a very real risk for homeless people as well as other members of the community. And the Greenway does have vegetation concerns that make it a much greater fire concern than other areas in the city. And there's a number of different ways that Greenway fires start. They can start from cooking fires, from warming fires, discarded cigarettes from people sleeping on the Greenway, having a cigarette before they go to sleep, etc. When the city talked about the fires on the Greenway in that last slide, and you could see the heat map of fires, some of those are intentional, some are accidental, and some of them are an undetermined cause. We're not saying that every one of those was intentionally set. That's not the case at all. But regardless, they are a public safety issue, regardless how the fire gets started, for both individuals experiencing homelessness and other individuals nearby to the Greenway if fires start there. Now, that said, fire safety is not the only public safety issue that informed the city of Medford's ordinance. There's also certain impacts on public property that come from unregulated camping. And I am going to draw a distinction between unregulated camping and regulated camping. And unregulated camping on public property can have a significant environmental impact. You can see here, this particular individual is camping near to the Bear Creek near to Bear Creek, and as water levels rose, a significant amount of litter entered the creek. Unfortunately, this is a very real occurrence that has happened on any number of occasions. Here's another instance. This was photographed by one of our patrol officers who was on the Greenway and actually came upon a makeshift shower and latrine that was built over Bear Creek, emptying directly into Bear Creek. And that obviously has very substantial riparian water quality issues. It also, these sorts of built up established encampments with permanent structure camping really impacts the ability and willingness of the rest of the public to use the public property for its intended purpose, for recreation, etc. So there's an environmental impact. There is also the usability of public property impact with this sort of structure camping unregulated on public property. Now, I do want to emphasize that this is not saying that structures themselves are problematic. Regulated camping can actually be very successful. And these are photographs from the Road Retreat Urban Campground. On the left, when it was first being established, on the right, showing more how it is nowadays with a substantial number of tents. And also you can see a pallet home a structure built up there that's a bit more than a tent, a bit less than a tiny home that you see at Hope Village. This sort of regulation is something that the city is trying to encourage and foster. It does offer a number of benefits, and in certain ways it's actually works even better than a traditional congregate shelter. It's got a lower cost per individual for the shelter operator and for individuals who are currently living unhoused. It may give a greater sense of privacy because they have their own private space in a tent that they may not have in a traditional congregate shelter. So regulated camping is definitely not prohibited by this ordinance, and it's in fact something that we're trying to encourage. So the process we went through is something I had not seen the city go through before with the particular ordinance, and it was informed by the city's work as part of a League of Oregon Cities work group with House Bill 3115. And as part of that work group, we got to spend some time talking with the Oregon Law Center about not just what they wanted to be the law with House Bill 3115, but in terms of best practices. And they'd really emphasized a desire to see cities engage with different community stakeholders in drafting time, place, manner regulations post-Blake. And so the city tried to follow that best practice in drafting ours. So we had a February study session with council where we had an original rough draft of the ordinance, shaped in part by the Blake opinion and those provisions that we talked about. But after getting council's green light to move it forward, there was a substantial effort over a couple months for city staff to engage with a number of different community stakeholders. We presented Housing Advisory Commission, we presented the Homeless Task Force, the Community Services and Development Commission, and then we directly solicited feedback from a number of grassroots activists to try and refine the ordinance. Obviously, some people would prefer that there be no rules and a services only approach, and that's ultimately not a direction the city was going to go with this. But in terms of refining the time, place, manner regulations, we did make a substantial effort to get feedback, and there was some feedback received. There's a lot of feedback received, several thousand emails in support, several thousand emails in opposition, and a number of different viewpoints on the issue. But we went through that feedback, we looked at it, we tried to identify different ways where we could incorporate concerns from the feedback while still serving the core purpose of the original draft that council had seen in February. So we had another study session with city council, discussed the feedback and discussed options to revise the proposal based on it. And there were a number of changes that were made before it was finalized based on that community feedback. So to talk about what it is in its final adopted form, and it was adopted in a series of votes on April 1st and April 2nd, there's 3 separate provisions of the ordinance, and each does operate separately. So I want to talk about each of them as its own item. Subsection 5 are specific times and places where any sleeping on public property, whether it just be with a bedroll or with a tent, are prohibited. first on the greenways, the Bear Creek Greenway, Larson Creek Greenway, et cetera, and in Prescott Park during fire season is prohibited. Those areas would be closed for sleeping even with a bedroll. The concern there obviously is even if one is just sleeping with a bedroll, a discarded cigarette from an individual sleeping there could start a substantial fire because of the unique vegetation present in those areas. Another specific location on playgrounds or sports fields during hours of park closure. Parks as a whole are not closed for individuals experiencing homelessness to sleep in under this. In fact, it's the first time I've found in decades where it's completely legal on the face of the ordinance for a homeless individual to sleep on a park bench or sleep in a grassy area of a park. But we do have restrictions specifically for playgrounds or sports fields because of the particular concerns there. I also want to emphasize this park thing has an exclusion for school parks. So for example, certain Medford School District properties, their outdoor fields are co-designated as city parks when the school is not in session. This sleeping overnight does not apply to those, but it does apply to other city parks where it would be lawful to sleep overnight so long as you stay off of playgrounds or sports fields. We have restrictions for underneath bridges because the concerns of damage to bridge infrastructure, railroad tracks, publicly owned property not open to the public. That's a mouthful and I always stumble over it. But, you know, issues like the Public Works Service Center, various areas like that, even though they're publicly owned, are not really meant for camping or recreation. So those are not opened up for people sleeping outside. The streets exception includes the park strip between the sidewalk and the street because that is part of the street safety barrier. So those areas are closed for sleeping. And then sidewalks, it is lawful to sleep on a sidewalk so long as an individual leaves at least a 36-inch wide path of travel. As a practical matter, that does exclude many residential sidewalks from this, and that 36-inch wide path of travel is important if individuals are in a mobility device or wheelchair, that they're still able to use the sidewalk for its intended purpose. But it is lawful on a larger sidewalk, like you see in some areas of the downtown, for an individual to lay down a bedroll on the side of the sidewalk and sleep there overnight if that's what they choose to do. So the next component of the ordinance as it was enacted deals with the issue of structure camping. And like I mentioned before, the ordinance really tries to draw a distinction between regulated and unregulated camping. So generally speaking, structure camping is prohibited in the city, but with a number of important exceptions. First, I want to make clear that this ordinance does not govern private property. If a shelter operator or a Good Samaritan wants to have a car camping operation on their property, there may be some code enforcement and some code issues and some land use issues to work through, but that is not subject to this particular ordinance. It only deals with public property. There's an exception for severe weather events. So the same way the city opens warming shelters, the city can also designate certain properties or give certain parameters for tent camping or car camping during a severe weather event. There's an exception for organized and improved operations. The urban campground currently is located on private property, but that's an example of what we talk about when we talk about an organized approved operation. There was also a car camping operation on Medford urban renewal property from earlier in the pandemic that would be another example of an organized and approved operation. And then finally, one of the provisions in this is council directed staff to work on developing a policy laying out particular circumstances or conditions in which tent camping or car camping on certain public property might be allowed. There's a number of possibilities on what that could look like. That policy is going to be developed in the next few months. Certainly some other cities have had success with overnight parking programs. I know both Beaverton and Eugene have had programs dealing with overnight parking. That's not the only possibility out there, but city staff is going to be researching and talking to stakeholders about developing a policy to allow additional car camping or tent camping on city property, particularly as the weather starts to turn cold again later in the year. And then the final component of this ordinance is a 24-hour rule. The Blake case was really clear that a city cannot prohibit an individual from laying down bedding to sleep, but they can set limitations on when that needs to be packed up. And I think the public policy behind that is if someone is permanently carving out a corner of a city park as their space with permanently laid out possessions, it does really prevent the park from being used by others, that portion of the park from being used by others in a way that isn't true if they simply lay down a bedroll, sleep for the night, and then pack it up and move along to a different location. That allows the park as a whole to still be available to the entire community for its intended purpose. And so the city of Medford, in areas where it is lawful to sleep outside, there is rule that bedding materials need to be packed up within 24 hours just to ensure that that property remains available to the whole community for its intended purpose, as opposed to becoming de facto one individual's private property. With that, I could take questions. I can also hand it over to Chief Clausen to talk about some additional points he's got.
I don't see any questions, so I'm just going to jump right into my portion here, and I'll just be very brief. So really the topic that I wanted to cover is, so now we have this ordinance. So what now? What are we doing as a police department to enforce this new rule? And so we really wanted to kind of test the waters initially. And so we are in week 4 this week. And to date, we have essentially posted for 72 hours each location that we want to clean up. So the way that looks is that on Monday morning, we go through, we identify, lately it's been an average of 7 tents that we want to remove. We post that area, we use a written marker, we give them a deadline, we talk to the individuals about the process. And then over the next 72-hour period of time, we bring in a lot of resources for individuals. We certainly educate them on the ordinance. We tell them about the urban campground and that the availability there. We also offer the mission for folks that want to go there. And then over that 72-hour period of time, we bring our community resources in. And so far, our partners that have been the most consistent are Options, Rogue Retreat, Birch Grove, which is a branch of La Clinica, and Access have gone down with us on a weekly basis now to try to do medical, to get people back on OHP, to get folks motel vouchers. And we've so far, for the last 3 weeks, had full compliance from individuals. They've either accepted services or have refused. A few have refused referrals and have left on their own. We've also worked with individuals to reunite with family. We had a couple that 2 weeks ago returned to Coos Bay. We reached out to their family and they were willing to take them back. Last week we had an individual go back to family in Shady Cove. So with a prompting, we're starting to see folks picking up and leaving on their own. So we have had activists each week. They do show up on a daily basis. They video record us and basically kind of yell over us. But essentially, that group seems to be dwindling in size. And so far, I think they're looking for some egregious situations, and honestly, I'm pretty happy with the Medford Police livability folks who really take a lot of time to get to know these individuals, to build rapport, and to provide resources. We have gone as far as renting a storage unit, to helping them transfer items to a storage unit. And a lot of these camps are enormous. They have really grown over the last year and a half because of the stay-in-place order. So they're pretty immense. So that's kind of where we're at. Again, we're we're in our final week 4. We've really focused around the Railroad Park area because that area is very heavily vegetated. And we had 2 homicides down there a few months ago. So we knew that it had there was a lot of unlawful and unruly behavior that was occurring down there. And then just with the fire danger to some of our neighbors and mobile home parks along Table Rock, we felt like that was important to really address right off the bat. So I know there's other areas. I get calls weekly from folks who are driving up and down I-5 and they see the tents here kind of in Midtown. We are going to focus on those next, but we felt like we really needed to address the really extreme fire hazard areas. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Mitten, for taking your time today and for making that presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief, for your part of it. I think that's really valuable information that is important for folks to know what it looks like in practice implementing this.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for presenting. I think over the last 2 years, this body has had a lot of discussions around the services and approach we have for people in our community who are unhoused. And this is another chapter as we continue to try and look for working, livable situations. And appreciate your time today. Thank you very much, Deputy City Attorney Mitten.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Right. All right, so every 2 years, we re-up our application as a county for treatment courts. And what the treatment court grantors ask of us, that's the Criminal Justice Commission up in Salem, is that we basically make an approval of whatever application goes up, goes up to them. So as a body, we are asked to give a letter of support. And what we've done traditionally is asked the treatment team to come in and just kind of give us a presentation of what they provide. At the end of this presentation, I'll provide some really basic figures in terms of what the budget proposal is, and we'll talk about the number of people that it anticipates serving, and then we'll ask for a vote on a letter of support. We also had a special request this year to talk a little about some of the history so that members of the community can have some context for where this work lies. But really, it is that Cadillac program of treatment and supports that targets some of our most high need and high risk clients in this area suffering substance use disorder. It has a long history of support. It was championed by Rita Sullivan and On Track initially, and they really built it into something that has been a statewide and even national model as to how it works with clients. But I do want to turn it over to Judge Ravasapur, and your team is here. So Judge, thanks for joining us. I know you had a hard time going from the docket to here without a lunch, so thank you again.
I am so excited to be here. I apologize we were late because we were in Rock, and today was kind of an exceptional day, and we had people reading graduation letters, and all of us agreed that it's too bad you all couldn't hear the letters of the participants. So I'll touch briefly on the history. There's been significant change in the last few years with our treatment courts. The first one we had obviously was a community family court. And then after that, we had adult drug court, and then recovery opportunity court started. So up until about 2-3 years ago, we had all 3 functioning treatment courts, and there's been a lot of change. First, with adult drug court, we closed that program and didn't re-up to apply for the grant. And Eric, correct me at any time if I'm wrong on dates. I think it's been a few years. That was a result of basically methamphetamine being decriminalized to a misdemeanor, and we just didn't have the participants applying for the program. Our numbers dropped dramatically, so we made a decision to close that court. Most recently was community family court is no longer going to be a treatment court that we're doing. We lost a lot of housing over the last few years, and so that incentive for families to want to participate declined dramatically. And I think we had 3 to 4 families actively in the case, and it just didn't make sense to use the limited resources the state has, the community has, on those families. On a side note, I can say in response to that, as also the juvenile judge, we've created a responsive track system where DHS is agreeing to do basically an analysis with families that have an open dependency case. And if certain criteria is met, they're going to be on this responsive track with more regular hearings assigned to one judge. So it has a lot of similarities to CFC in that regard. And we're really hoping that works. ROC, which stands for Recovery Opportunity Court, is a result of a ballot measure 57, that was passed for property crimes. And so everyone in our program is looking at going to prison. So in lieu of prison, they come into ROC, they agree to probation for 3 years. They have court, weekly, and that slowly goes out. I wrote a letter and I'm hoping some of you read it. I'm not sure if you did. Just kind of giving an overall what the program looks like. I can tell you that the program is a lot harder than going to prison. Most of our participants have been in prison, and that didn't work because they came out, they got new crimes, and now we're dealing with them. So the history of the property court was really a reaction to the change in case law. The changes are continuing to occur as far as how many property crimes a person needs in order to go to prison. So what a lot of us are unfortunately anticipating in the next years to come with ballot measure 110 decriminalizing drugs is that we're probably going to have a larger population committing property crimes that could filter into a program like ROC. Hopefully that's not the case, but that's most likely the reality if you talk to people who are involved in the criminal justice system. So ROC has a specific team with us today. I see we have got Steve Schultz from the probation department, Jeff Brown, who is a drug and alcohol counselor from the ARC, Nathan Olson, who is the supervisor and kind of oversees, and we're your ROC team. I don't have my peer mentors there, but it's awesome. We've been doing it for 5 years, and I was having a discussion with someone yesterday about the pendulum. And like 20 years ago, and Rita could attest to this, when we first were doing the treatment courts, we didn't have a lot of buy-in. People just didn't necessarily understand addiction and believe in recovery. And we're at a point today where we're really fortunate that people are more open-minded to see that, our prisons are really full. And it's not always the best answer. So we're really big on accountability. At least I can say that from my part. But we really try to work with people to make positive change because they are going to come back to our community. So let's give them the resources and the support and work on the COG piece. Eric Geyer, the probation department, has a TCP program they're interviewing today. That's a 180-day residential program. I wish we could just explode that thing and have every participant in it because it's phenomenal. And our men and women coming from that and then dovetailing into ROC has just really been a healthy relationship to make some long-lasting change. So that's like the really short version. I don't want to bore all of you because I know most of you know what treatment court is, but that's what we do. As far as numbers, I think Eric is going to share with you that we do have a graduation coming up on June 8th at 10 o'clock. And if anyone wants to attend to see some pretty remarkable change, it's refreshing to see. I really appreciate what Chief Clausen and what MPD is dealing with on a daily basis. It is really hard. And a lot of challenges in our community. So to have something like ROC that's positive is really just like a beacon of hope for a lot of us working in a rather difficult time. So, and I'm open for any questions, but I want to make sure that the PO and our treatment team has time as well.
I think the judge was mostly going to talk about the program and Eric's going to talk about budget. And I think mostly everyone just wants to hear from the team. We just want to continue the Recovery Opportunity Court. I didn't know, Eric, if there's more you need from me I'm just hoping that this group will continue to support that going forward because it has been successful in our community.
I think that's good, Tina, in terms of what the team needed. And I agree that with Jeff and Steve here, they definitely get to tell more of those stories that the judge was referring to in terms of the lives that are impacted, some of the real challenges. I think that if you were to look at this court and how it's evolved, this court was an early adopter of the idea that it should focus on high and medium risk to recidivate individuals, which was a shift. A lot of drug courts in the state and in the nation didn't do that. It was a lower level clientele they served. But these were folks who were going to prison were it not for this program. And this program has worked with some people for whom many in the system said, boy, that person doesn't look like they have a high likelihood for success. And yet this court continues to believe in them, work with them, and see outcomes in those lives that are just really transformational. So not to tee it up too much, but I think we'll kick it over to Jeff Brown, one of my all-time favorite people and an incredible treatment provider in our valley. So Jeff, if you want to talk about the work your team does.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces here today. So I think, basically, I'll just talk about myself for a minute. I went through treatment court. I went through rock court about 10 years ago with Judge Crane. And honestly, I'd been to prison before. I'm a multiple time felon. I lived in my addiction for about 30 years. And I would agree, jail, prison never helped me. But the one thing that did was rock court this last time. And I bought into the court because they believed in me. I didn't believe in myself. I couldn't stand myself when I started rock court. I just figured I was too much of a failure. I was never going to be able to get the life that I wanted back. I figured I went too far in the wrong direction. But through just a judge really was the key factor. Having Judge Crane look at me and tell me that, I see something in you. You can change, you can do this. That was huge. And that's what treatment court does. Like no other time does a criminal go to court and have a interaction with a judge like that. And it's huge. It's huge for me. It's huge for all of our participants. And then from there, going into On Track and going to counseling for 18 months, that's big. Most people go to treatment for 90 days. So we have something that lasts for a really long time. And it really allows participants to just get into a bunch of different services, get into group therapy amongst peers, people that understand them, that are going through the same things, and they connect. I believe the opposite of addiction is connection. And in treatment courts, we connect. We connect to the team, the group connects to each other, and people change. I graduated treatment court about 8 or 9 years ago. I've graduated college since then. I've got my KDAC 1, my KDAC 2. I bought and sold a house. I'm friends with a good majority of people on this screen. I have connections and friendships today. And all these things I learned how to do in rock court. It all started there for me. I learned how to connect with the wider society in court. And then I just transferred those skills as I moved on. I can tell you guys in the last 5 years, I've graduated probably, 200 or 300 people from my caseload that have graduated treatment court. And a good number of them are pillars in our community. They're pillars in the recovery community. People that come out of rock court usually will graduate with that. They just authentically grow into this place of serving others. And when they graduate the program, they're serving others at the Recovery Cafe. They're secretaries of the 12-step meetings. They facilitate and run Oxford houses as a whole. These are mostly our rock graduates that are doing this stuff in our recovery community. And you guys all know there's no better therapeutic value than one addict helping another. And that's what our court brings. I think Eric said, started out this thing that's our Cadillac treatment model. And I swear by it. It is. I think everybody could benefit from rock instead of going to prison. That's my personal opinion. But thank you for the time. I'll let Steve talk a little bit. Thank you, Eric.
I'm lucky enough to be able to work on this caseload. I've been able to do it, God, 6-7 years now. I forget, but it's been a while. And this program does do a lot of what everyone just said. You know, following the judge and Jeff is such a luxury because they said so many good things, right? I just get to tee off on that and follow up on that. It is the Cadillac program. I wish I came up with that once upon a time, but definitely Eric's, and I will definitely use that. And the strength and treatment court. And the thing I could probably bring to this conversation, has been said, is that team aspect, right? We have a full team. We have the judge, of course, probation, treatment. The DA's office is part of it, the public defenders, Medford police, the VA if we need. And that is probably the greatest strength Rockport brings as opposed to, you know, your typical supervision. There is no lag between connection. Luckily, we have a strong team, so we can openly share opinions and thoughts and learn from each other. We're well trained. We follow up with what the best practices and what they're changing. As we discussed, things are changing, and a court changes with it, with the ultimate goal of not just holding people accountable, because accountability is there, but not looking at these people as people that need to be held accountable only, but people who need help making better choices, right? As they make the better choices, that comes in with it. They start becoming better community members. And Jeff mentioned it, but pillars of the recovery community, to say the least. One of the luxuries we have, or one of the best parts we have on being part of this team, is I was just in Costco the other day, getting to yell across the whole store and getting to hear stories, right? They're not only pillars within recovery community, but a lot of them within their jobs, or even sometimes within their families, right? They start repairing all those relationships, getting healthy. The court really does a good job of course, focusing on those responsivity and criminogenic needs, moving on to the maintenance needs, and ultimately even the restorative justice needs. Start paying back to the community, making sure victims are addressed, making sure there's follow through on that end. So it is really a good way of helping people make those choices that help not only them, but the community as a whole. And it is so much better. The long-term success, instead of people going up to prison. We know there is a time and a place for that, of course, but the long-term success of people who've completed the programs as opposed to people going to prison, it is astounding. And we can share some names that we know are currently successful. And I too am lucky enough to work with many people in this room already, and I've met many people, and I could share some names that we'd all just start nodding and smiling, right? They've been around for a while, that are doing really good, and we'll have a conversation with anyone in this room and just be so thankful for where they're at. So I just really wanted to stress that the services this court provides, the teamwork that is there, and the ultimate goal of the court is it's right on par with where the state's going, and constantly adjusting where it needs to meet the needs that are currently happening. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you too. All right. We have Melissa Cochran from the courts here scheduled to talk. Melissa, if you wanted to share anything too about the work that's done.
Actually, I wasn't going to present too much here today, but I do want to say that I'm newly the supervisor here for Rock Court, and I have to say I've witnessed court, and I've witnessed the people that are a part of court and how they interact with the participants, and it's a great program, and I highly encourage everyone within our community to get behind Rock Court and behind what we're doing here, and I would just ask for your support in this. And I know that there are other team members here that would like to talk, so I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I appreciate the time that you're giving to us today. Thank you.
No, thanks, Melissa. I appreciate it. And Susie, while you did make it, and I appreciate you as somebody who's been a part of treatment courts in our community for a long time, and if there's anything you want to share or add to this team as you transition from the family court process to the Rock Court, are we calling it the treatment court process that we have currently, you have made a deep impact on so many lives with this process.
Gosh, Eric, thank you for letting me speak. I wasn't planning on being here. I'm grateful. I really believe in treatment courts. I've been part of treatment courts here for almost 14 years and think the model is highly successful for many people. And so I really hope to continue the great work that we're doing. Today, as Judge Ravasapur said, hearing those letters in court, those are the miracle moments of the work that we're doing. Those are individuals who have worked so hard to change their lives and be a part of our community. So grateful for the committee's time today and in considering Rock, and thankful as always to do this work every day.
It's awesome, Susie. And I guess I'm getting ticketed as the guy who came up with Cadillac treatment model. I don't know if that's really something I made up, but I will say there are so many pieces to it that are important. And the district attorney's office and Beth Heckert being willing to give offers and build around this court and what this court can do. Doug Engel and the public defender being present all of the time to provide the supports and assurances necessary for the people who participate. There are a number of other treatment supports and employment supports and residential supports. Captain Aldrich is here from the jail, and the jail support when a sanction is needed so that a person can have a 15 or 30-day timeout rather than have to go to prison. That's really important, especially knowing how hard it is to get a jail bed, but their commitment has been one of the things that has made this possible. So it's a number of people that keep this Cadillac polished up and looking good and on the road. So it's not just one entity, although certainly many people have been a part of it. Jasmine, I had a couple of slides that I shared with you. I'm wondering if you could bring those up real quick. So in 2020, we were carrying an average of 55 clients within this program. So about that many people were in the program. There were 24 graduations, and of those 24 people, the total amount of prisons months they were looking at was 608 months. So if we didn't have this and they'd gone straight to prison, we would have charged the state of Oregon $2.5 million for each of those, for the total of that prison time. Prison beds are about $137 a day. Those months would have costed out at $2.5 million. And so over the next biennium, we anticipate running that 55-person clientele over those 2 years. And so the budget and the request that's going to go up to the Criminal Justice Commission accounts for $536,000 over 2 years. So it's a biennial request. That breaks out to $37,000 to community justice for the administration and oversight, $281,856 to the courts for the treatment court coordinator position. The ARC receives $203,747 over the 2 years for treatment supports and services, including peer supports. And then travel and training with an increased emphasis on equity over this next year of $13,756 for the course of the biennium. So that's the budget outline. I would certainly entertain any comments, discussion, or questions. We do have a group of experts here if people have comments. Yes, Mayor Sparacino.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. What type of motion are you seeking here?
We're going to seek a motion to support the application for the treatment court services as proposed here to the CJC.
So moved.
We have a motion from the mayor. Do we have a second? I see Dave. I saw Dave Carter early in that. So Dave.
I second.
Oh, Commissioner Dotter, though unmuted. So Commissioner Dotter with the second. So
You got to be faster.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. So we have a motion. We have a second to support this application. Jasmine, will you do a roll call vote for members today?
Yes. All right, starting with Lieutenant Aldridge,
Yes.
Dave Carter,
Yes.
Travis Christian,
Yes.
Chief Clausen,
Yes.
Commissioner Dotter,
Yes.
Doug Engel,
Yes.
Chair Guyer,
Yes.
Beth Heckert,
Yes.
Judge Mejia,
Yes. I love yes.
Hilda,
Yes.
Tina Qualls,
Yes.
Sheriff Sickler,
Yes.
Mayor Sparacino,
Yes.
and Rita Sullivan.
Yes.
Okay, that's everyone.
And Rita, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, any comments about the importance of drug court and its legacy in this community?
I have a definite support for this kind of activity, and I wish all the courts were open, still all the treatment courts. I've seen remarkable things happen in all the courts, and it's too bad that these external changes can impact a really important core function. So I'm 100% supportive of this, always have been and always will be. And so I think Jeff and the team are doing a remarkable job, the judges, everyone. I just think we've got to be protective and grow these back up again.
Thank you.
I do want to say one thing about what Judge Ravasapor said about community acceptance at first. And I think Doug will remember this. It used to be, when we first started, it used to be called Huggy Court.
That's the sentiment around it. So now we know, and what was said is so important, that really it's much harder than sitting in prison. So I think people have evolved to understand that, and partly because of the good messaging that the team does and the judge does and the ambassadors who graduate from it. So thanks for giving me a minute.
Absolutely. Much appreciated. All right, folks. Well, that's our agenda for today. We will meet back next month. And until that time, be safe and thank you.